Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of From Dropout to JD. I'm your host, Adesua, and this week's guest is Eric.
Hi, my name is Eric Oden. I am primarily a criminal defense attorney based in Montana. I am from Texas, moved to Montana after law school. Um, After I graduated law school, I worked for a technology company negotiating and drafting contracts for a little while. Um, it, it was not very fulfilling work. And so I opened my own solo law practice, did that for about a year, and then went to work at the public defender's office. The public defender in Montana is a state-run office, so I was covering courts in 3 counties, mostly doing misdemeanors. Also at the public defender's office, we would do civil commitment cases, which is when the state wants to bring or to send somebody to the state hospital, the mental institution. We would defend those people.
Hmm.
I did that for a couple of years, and then I went to a small general practice that did criminal defense and civil litigation. After the public defender's office, I worked there for about close to 3 years, doing probably half criminal defense and half general civil, family law, business disputes, stuff like that. And then last August, I reopened my solo practice, doing primarily criminal defense. And that is, I still have a few civil cases hanging out there, but aside from those, criminal defense is all I do. Um, and I'm a high school dropout. I When I was younger, I went to a alternative high school for troubled youths. And if
Hmm.
anybody has followed, Paris Hilton has been testifying about a school called Provo Canyon in Provo, Utah. I went to the sister school owned by the same people at the time. It was called
Hmm.
Discovery Academy. Um, from looking at their webpage recently, it looks like they've spent the last 15 years kind of cleaning up their image and stuff like that. But it was a self-paced high school. I got a lot of high school done, and at the end of it, when just after I turned 17, they told me, "Well, you're through with our therapeutic program, so you can go home." And now I'd been there for 18 months at that point. Um, and you can go home. You're 1 or 2 credits shy of all of your high school credits. So, excuse me, sorry about that. So you can stay and finish your high school credits, or you can go home. I said, I'd like to go home, please. I'll finish high school, correspondence or whatever. Of course, I never ended up doing that. Um, Instead, I went home, went to work at the first job I could get, which was at a grocery store at Whole Foods in Dallas as a cashier. And as when I was younger, it was great fun. After 2 or 3 years of working there, I realized I didn't want to work at a grocery store for the rest of my life. So I went to community college first, but I realized I needed to go back to school. Of course, since then, people that I've known and still work there are, high up in the corporate organization and making very good money. So I think my attitude was a little incorrect when, as 17, 18-year-olds can be. Um, but so I went to a community college in Plano, Texas, Collin County Community College, which is now known as Collin College. I went there for a year and a half, and then my goal, which ended up happening, was to transfer to the University of Texas at Austin. Um, and that was when I ended up getting my GED, because the University of Texas required a GED for application and admittance, but Collin County Community College did not. So,
Oh,
you
wow.
know, before I saw no reason to, and then when I wanted to apply to UT, I then had a reason um, to get my GED. And I'm getting a phone call. Okay, there we go. Minimized it. Sorry for the interruption. So At UT, I majored in history, graduated with a BA in history. My focuses were Russian and Japanese history. I
Mm.
found it very difficult after graduation to really find a job at all. I graduated in December of 2008. There was a very bad recession going on, and it was virtually impossible to find any job with a liberal arts degree. And I hadn't worked through college. That was something that I realized was a mistake, not to get some work experience during college, after college when it was too late. Um, so I got a job working at a bank as a bank teller. Um, and that was good, but again, I didn't really see much advancement potential. I did that for a couple of years. And then I started thinking about graduate school. Having a history degree, my first thought was, do I want to go to graduate school and study history? And I had known some graduate students who had done that. And kind of my impression was you have to have a very narrow focus in graduate school studying history. And also there just aren't that many jobs being a professor of history going around. So it's, it would be tough going that route. So I thought, law school or business school. And law school was 3 years, business school 2. Business school just seemed wasn't something that I was all that interested in. Once I started studying for the LSAT,
Mm.
which is the law school admission test, uh, it was kind of fun. Yeah, I liked the logic games. I liked the reasoning and stuff like that. Um, so I took the LSAT, ended up getting a fairly good score. Um, and I think we're going to sort of talk in a little bit more detail about applying to law schools and things like that. I applied to 4 schools. One, I was living in Dallas at the time. That's where I
Mm.
grew up, Dallas, Texas. I applied to Texas Tech Law School. I applied to the Southern Methodist University Law School. It's the Dedman Law School, the University of Texas Law School. And my big reach was the law school in Berkeley, California. Um, Berkeley basically, did the very polite admissions equivalent of laughing at my application. Um, the University of Texas very politely declined. Um, SMU accepted me with a good scholarship, and Texas Tech accepted me with a full scholarship.
Okay.
So I ended up going to SMU in Dallas, um, and graduated from there with my JD. After I graduated, I pretty much immediately, well, maybe a month later, packed up a U-Haul van and moved to Montana with my wife. I was listening to bar review lectures in the moving van. I wouldn't recommend it, but whatever you can make things work when you have to. And that's kind of my story about my journey from dropout to JD to practicing attorney. I've now been a practicing attorney for about 8 years, and I really enjoy what I do, especially with criminal defense. I get to help people. Um, I do even though I'm in private practice and run my own private practice, I still take cases from the public defender's office. They are hugely busy and don't have enough attorneys to cover all the cases that they need. So I take some cases from them. I recently joined the federal CJA panel, it's called, but it's basically being a public being available for appointments on federal criminal cases for people who can't afford an attorney. Um, and I'm very fulfilled and satisfied with what I do for a living.
Awesome. That was a really concise and well-worded explanation of your whole journey. That was really
Well, thank
cool.
you. I just felt like I ranted for a little while, and I hope it sounded okay.
No, that was perfect. I do have a couple of questions. So
Hmm.
I hate to go back, but
Go
so
back all you want.
you said when you dropped out, it was because was it just because you didn't want to stay at that specific school, or like you had a choice?
Yeah. So as I said, it was, it was what's called a therapeutic boarding school. And it's kind of hard to describe. That doesn't really capture it. There was a therapy component, but for the most part, the doors were locked, the windows were locked. We had people running away on a regular
Mm,
basis who would come back, kind of bruised and battered. Their discipline was kind of draconian. I don't know a better word for it. The standard unit of discipline was called a demerit, and when you got a demerit, you would have to
mhm.
stand facing a wall for 25 minutes with your nose 4 to 6 inches away from the wall, and you normally wouldn't just get one demerit at a time. So you do 25 minutes, 5 minute break, and then another 25 minutes.
Hmm.
And kind of 5 and 10 demerits were handed out like candy for any sort of rule infraction. Anybody who tried to run would get 150 demerits, and they'd
Oh,
go to what's called
wow.
ISU, which was the intensive supervision unit. It was basically a closet where people just stood demerits all day and ate food during their 5 minute break sometimes. Um, so yeah, I guess when I explained it, I framed it as a choice, and it really was a choice, but the option of staying might have been a little worse than I had really let on during my initial monologue.
Okay, yeah, that when you put it into perspective, I would see why you would leave. I would have probably chosen the same. So let me look at some of the questions that I have. So what was your law school admission process like?
Um, I mean, it's kind of tough. The admission process, I'd say, was like 80% studying for the LSAT and taking the LSAT. And
Okay.
then the rest of it was, I mean, you're right. The rest of it's kind of you fill out forms and write a few essays and get your undergrad transcript and stuff like that. But the LSAT is the really big component of kind of putting your application together and preparing your application. And also, the LSAT is what you really have control over, that matters a lot during the law school application process. Your undergrad GPA, if you've graduated by this point, which is most of the people who are applying to law school have either graduated or close to it, you can't really do much about your GPA anymore, so what you can do is focus on the LSAT and make that LSAT score as high as possible. So when I think back to my law school application process, basically the only thing that stands out is studying for the LSAT and then taking the LSAT and then being very relieved at having taken the LSAT.
Okay. And do you think that the LSAT helps at all with law school? Is there like a connection you see?
Yeah, sort of, but not really. I mean, I think the LSAT really evaluates somebody's ability to study for a test and to take the test, which is a skill that an attorney is going to need to take the bar. Um, I don't think the LSAT necessarily tests skills that make someone, predict if someone's going to be successful or not in law school. I also don't think the bar tests things that predict whether somebody's going to be successful as a lawyer. Um, so yeah, I mean, it just tests someone ability to study for and take a test. Yeah, and there's some correlation that I've seen between law school performance and LSAT scores, but I think in general it's fairly weak.
Okay. And same with the bar. Do you think that there's any correlation between that exam and actually being a practicing attorney?
No, I think what people don't realize about being a practicing attorney is that eh, the general public and people who are your clients really have no idea how to evaluate their attorney's performance. And it's the same with any profession that requires a lot of study. You know, when I go see my doctor, I can judge my doctor on his or her bedside manner, how quick they
Mm-hmm.
saw me, things like that. Things are kind of proxies that I use to judge performance, but they really don't have anything to do with whether she's a good doctor or not. So clients, when you're a practicing attorney, they uh, they know how an attorney makes them feel. And I know a lot of attorneys, well, maybe not a lot of attorneys, but I've run across a fair number of attorneys who basically are terrible attorneys. Um, and their clients love them because they say the right things to their clients, they make their clients feel good. Ideally, you can have both of those things, you know, make your clients feel good and do a great job at the same time. And that's what I try and do. But realistically, unless you're in a profession, you're not really equipped to judge the objective performance of someone in another profession. Like I said, I have no idea if my doctor is actually a good doctor. I think she is. I have
Mm.
no idea if my accountant's good. I hope so, but there are certain proxies that I use to judge those things, but I realize those are proxies, and my doctor could be a horrible doctor and misdiagnosing me all the time, and I wouldn't really know.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What do you think, what do you consider a bad lawyer?
So there are a few important things about practicing law that I take very seriously. One is I owe my clients a objective evaluation of their case or their legal position based on my training and experience. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes clients don't want to hear that. Sometimes they want me to file a motion about something they think is an issue, or
Mm-hmm.
or even taking their case. And the best thing I can do for them is say, I know you don't really want to hear this, but you don't have anything here. And if you pursue this, you're just going to waste a lot of money and not be successful in the end. So, a good attorney objectively evaluates, their client's chances of success. And that's where I've seen a fair amount of attorneys um, kind of fall down because they don't want to disappoint a client, or they want to sign up a client and not turn that client away, even though their cause of action is probably not going to have any chance of success. And and also I've run across attorneys who are just sort of almost pathologically optimistic about whatever argument or strategy they have at the time, even when it has no chance of success whatsoever. I mean, for
Mm.
example, I've doing research in a federal case of mine. I saw an attorney that I'm familiar with um, had a lost at the district court level and appealed to the circuit court, and everything in that attorney's appeal was arguing state law. And the circuit court said, well, this is all great and everything, but state law doesn't apply here because this is federal court. And I just
Okay.
thought to myself, what is this person doing? I mean, they're either being dishonest, or like I said, pathologically optimistic about their chances of success when there really are none. But yeah, I think one of the real jobs of an attorney is to objectively evaluate someone's case based on our training and experience and relay that to them. And sometimes I've told people, you know, I don't think there's any realistic chance of success for this. I've been surprised before. I don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And, here's what it's probably going to be cost. And so if you want to roll the dice, I'd be happy to pursue this for you. And clients appreciate that. They like going in with their eyes wide open. And again, they're not equipped to make those judgments themselves because they don't have legal training. And so it's really important to be honest with clients about their chances of success, stuff like that.
Okay. So something that you said earlier that was of interest is that after you left high school, you worked at like a Whole Foods, you said, a grocery store, and
Yep.
how that was kind of a factor for pushing you to finish your schoolwork. And that's something that I relate to. Like after I left school, I left Rutgers in 2018. I worked a bunch of service jobs, and it was very demanding on my body. And I just felt like there was like there's better use for it somewhere else, like my energy and my time. So I was like, maybe if I go back to school and I get a degree, I'll get like a better paying job that where I don't have to be on my feet all day. um do you at this point think that would you consider yourself a happy lawyer? Like, are you happy with the work that you do?
Yes. And there are a lot of unhappy lawyers, but I'm a happy one because one, I get to choose my clients.
Hmm.
Sometimes I talk to people and there's just I get a weird vibe or something like that, and I don't have to take anybody's case. So it's great to be able to sort of control my work like that. I also control the types of cases that I work on, having my own practice. In my last practice that I did not own,
Hmm.
I had a fair amount of family law, divorce, child custody cases. I realized I hated those, so I don't need to
Hmm.
take those anymore.
Interesting.
It's great. So I can control my caseload, and I really like being able to help people. And doing criminal defense, you kind of help people on an individual basis that you can really see. Most people have not interacted with the court system, have not been charged with a crime, things like that. So when it happens for the first time, it's scary. It's scary for people. Minimum and maximum penalties can be crazy. I mean, in my jurisdiction in Montana for a DUI, the
Hmm.
maximum penalty is incarceration for 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And people hear that, and it sort of makes your heart stop when a judge reads that to you. And there's a real benefit to having somebody next to you during that time who says, relax, it's okay, this is what I do, I've done hundreds of DUIs, everything's going to be fine, here's what's going
Mm.
to happen during our next court date, here's what's going to happen as your case progresses, this is what we can expect. And that puts a lot of people at ease. um, and I just find that very fulfilling to be able to kind of help people through what's a very painful process, trying to minimize the pain inflicted by the system.
Right. So are you able to get these people like out of being like imprisoned for 6 months? Is that like a likelihood? Is there, yeah.
Yeah, well, in my jurisdiction, taking that DUI example, that's for a first time DUI. Penalties, increase every DUI after that. The maximum for a first DUI is 6 months in the detention center. The minimum is 24 hours. In
Okay.
practice, people almost always get the minimum. And if somebody doesn't get the minimum, they get the minimum plus a little bit. I have never, ever seen somebody get, really over like a few days in the detention center on their first DUI, even though those maximum penalties are so high. Really, what I think the maximum penalties are for is to coerce people into accepting plea agreements, which is really a flaw in the system. And it's funny because the judges ask when people have plea agreements and they change their pleas, have you been threatened or coerced in any way into changing your plea? And the coercion inherent in the system with those huge maximum penalties does not count as coercion, even though it absolutely is.
Right. That makes sense. Do people like pay a lot of money to when they take their plea?
Yeah, generally. One thing I've noticed about criminal defense is everybody wants some money. Um, I do, the court does, prosecutor's office gets some money. There's always, fairly significant fine. Court costs are always $50 to $100 in my jurisdiction, which, it's probably a lot more in some other jurisdictions. And then, there's ancillary things to pay for as well. If there's a drug or alcohol connection, um, to the charged offense, frequently, again, in my jurisdiction, frequently people have to do some sort of pretrial supervision, whether it's alcohol testing, drug testing, stuff like that. They have to pay for that. If they can't pay for that, they have to go to the detention center or post more bond. And everybody wants money from a criminal defendant. And it's really a problem for people who don't have much money.
Right. So what kind of what's like your day to day with at your current practice?
It really changes every single day. It depends if I have court that day, where my court is. I take cases from all around Montana. I'm sorry, my phone keeps ringing. I don't know why somebody's trying to call me over and over again. But so, there was a day this week where I drove 3 hours away to go to a court appearance. Yesterday, I drove to a court a half hour away in the morning and then 2 hours away in the afternoon. In between that time, when I'm in the office, I generally have phone calls to return,
Mm-hmm.
discovery to review, stuff like that, prosecutors to get in touch with about potential resolutions to cases. Um, so, either I'm in court or I'm trying to push the ball forward on a case that is ready for it. Um, so yeah, it's kind of hard to answer what I do day to day. And then there's motion writing and things like that. And so there's just sort of a lot from the universe of possibilities of what I could be doing in a day.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how busy you are as a criminal defense lawyer, like compared to a corporate lawyer who has billable hours they have to meet.
Yeah, so in my practice, like I said, I have a few civil cases hanging around, and those are hourly. For criminal defense, I do almost exclusively flat fees, which is
Okay.
wonderful since I don't have to keep track of my time. Um, my general, I think the question you're getting at is more kind of what's my quality of life as an attorney.
Yeah.
And I work from 8 to 5. Um, I have two small children, so if they need something, I can pick my daughter up from daycare and bring her to dance class if I want to. I hardly ever work weekends or outside of 9 to 5. Um, so yeah, it's really nice. And again, that's sort of a function of working for myself. There are certainly small firms that kind of emphasize that quality of life that's really important to me as well, that kind of have the same setup. The big firms, though, really do not. There's when people graduate law school, there's sort of a very large salary at big law firms that
Hmm.
somebody can get if they're normally in the top 10% of their class, something like that, depending on where they go. And then there's attorneys who have a much better quality of life that make much less money, normally I'd say starting at about 60 to 80,000. um, and those big law firms pay, I haven't really checked in years, but it's probably approaching 200,000 a year. And they really expect to get their money's worth for that. I mean, it's generally they'll have billable hour requirements of anywhere from 2,000 to 2,300 hours. And just for reference, a 2,000-hour billable requirement means billing 8 hours a day every single day with 2 weeks off per year, so 50 hours during the week, not including holidays. Those would have to be made up for any holiday where somebody wants to have the temerity to take Christmas off or something like that, those hours would have to be made up. So there's a lot to it. And I know attorneys who work in big law firms, and, a lot of them are unhappy, a lot of them are happy. But you have to go into that trade-off with your eyes wide open. If you work in a big law firm and you have a vacation with your family planned, and there's like a big transaction that needs to close around that time, you're not going to be able to go on that vacation, whether that means canceling it or sending your family and you not going. But so I really have always emphasized my quality of life. I don't think it would be possible for me to bill 2,000 hours a year, even if I wanted to. And if it was possible, I would basically be killing myself doing that.
Yeah, I'm at that point right now trying to figure out where I want to go and what I'm trying to do with that, because my sister is getting into a bunch of really nice schools right now. She got into Georgetown, UCLA, Duke
Oh, great.
University. Right. But as I'm looking to apply to those schools as well, I'm trying to figure out why would I want to? Like, what's the benefit of going to these nice schools if I don't want to do big law? So that's something I've been considering. And I'm just curious to see what other options there are other than big law.
Yeah, and there's a lot of options. I am very fulfilled, and I with my solo practice, it took a few years of experience to build up to that. But outside of big law, there are all sorts of things you can do. There are smaller practices where you can still have that good quality of life, working 8 hours a day and actually being able to take the weekends off. So as far as what law school to apply to, I think, you know, eh, generally everybody wants to get into the top 14 law
Hmm.
schools. And if you're going to big law, then graduating from top 14 law school makes things a heck of a lot easier. There's a lot, they go a lot deeper in the class rank. So, if you graduate from Harvard, if you're in the top half of your class, you could probably, get a big law interview. Whereas somewhere like I went, they won't sit down with you unless you're in the top 10%. So there are advantages to that. But realistically, I think, what I would do is think about where I want to practice law. Um, where you want to settle after law school, and try and go to law school there, because those places have good, every law school has a good alumni network. Even if the law school is not top 14 or even top 50, it's probably known and fairly respected in the immediate surrounding area. I know here in Montana, the University of Montana Law School, which is the only law school in the state, it's very well known, well respected. And so, there would be no doors closed on any attorney who went to the University of Montana here in Montana, especially one that did well there. And it would be a lot cheaper than going to a lot of higher ranked schools if someone was a resident. And kind of the same thing, I went to SMU in Dallas. Again, I haven't checked in years, but last time I checked, SMU was ranked somewhere around 50 in the country.
Right.
um, and it's very well known and well respected in Dallas. So you know it would have been, it was a good place to go to. And had I wanted to settle in Dallas, being an SMU graduate would have served me very well, with having a pretty deep alumni network in Dallas. So if I was doing it all over again
Hmm.
and I knew I was going to end up in Montana, I probably would have moved to Montana a year before law school, gone to U of M, and done it that way instead of going to SMU and then moving to Montana immediately after. That being said, I'm happy with where I am, and everything worked out great.
Okay, and so I have four more questions to ask you before we end the interview. And one of the questions is kind of a two-parter. What was the best and worst thing about attending law school?
The worst, that's an easy one. The worst thing about attending law school are the exams 1L year,
Mm,
because you're not used to it. You're still kind of learning the law school process. And I actually had a panic attack my first semester in law school and almost just quit the whole thing and went and did something else. I mean, I'd never had a panic attack like this before, but I thought I was having a heart attack or something. Uh, and it was really scary. But, I had dinner with a family friend who really discouraged me from dropping out of law school without anything else lined up. So I I stayed in law school. But those exams the first year, each class is a 3.5 hour essay exam, which
mhm.
is just as long as the LSAT, except you don't get breaks during the law school exams. So um, as difficult as the LSAT was at the time, now when you're a 1L, you've basically got to do that same thing 5 times every semester. So getting used to that was the worst part of law school. The best part of law school was, you're in a room with a bunch of smart people who are grappling with the same ideas that you're grappling with, and you get to sort of bounce ideas off of people and learn from each other. Um, and going into law school, I heard horror stories about how competitive it is, and law school students trying to kind of put each other down so that they could be higher in the law school class rankings. And I just found that wasn't the case. It's kind of like everybody is going through this really intense, difficult experience, and everybody kind of relies on each other, and that was really nice to see.
Okay. And my next question is, if you could go back and change anything, would you? And if so, what would it be? In
I
regards to like the law school process.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I would not change anything major. What I would change is I've always found it very, very difficult to ask for help.
Mm,
So in law school, and even before that, I never went to stuff like professor's office hours, things like that. I wish that when I was struggling, I made more use of the available resources and asked for help more. I think I would have saved myself a lot of trouble by doing that. And and as a practicing attorney, I love to help attorneys who are earlier in the process than I was. I remember being a brand new attorney, and you hear this all the time, but law school doesn't really teach you anything about being an attorney. So you graduate law school, you have no idea what you're doing. I
mm,
remember being there. Every single attorney's been there before, and I love to help new attorneys. uh, Love to show them kind of how to practice law in a nuts and bolts way that you don't get in law school. So you know people like to help, just don't be afraid to ask. And I was afraid to ask for so long. Like I said, I could have saved myself a lot of trouble if I had been more comfortable asking people for help.
okay. My last question is if it's really centered, or I guess directed to anyone who's listening to this podcast who have been in similar situations to us where we've dropped out of high school or college and are trying to overcome adversity and get to our JD. What advice do you have for anyone who is in a similar situation?
I don't know about advice, but I would just say you would be shocked at what you're capable of. If you set a goal and work towards that goal, you'd be shocked at what you can accomplish in 6 months, a year, 2 years, with just steady work towards your goal. And even if it's something that seems impossible at the outset, once you see progress towards that goal, it gets very
Hmm.
encouraging. And uh, just like I said, you'd be shocked at what you can accomplish if you just work towards something for a long time. And, I'd say that's my advice is basically you can do it. I believe in you. And, you just work hard and, there are going to be bumps in the road and things are going to work out.
Yeah. And I'd also add to that to give yourself grace and the time to grow into someone who can do the things that you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to take on the LSAT, don't be surprised if it takes months to get to where you're trying to be. So that's something I've always been really bad about is being really upset when I can't do something in a day.
Yeah, no, that's great advice is you really, while you're working towards a goal, you really need to be kind to yourself and realize nobody is born with a skill. People have natural talents, take to things kind of more quickly than others, but there's really no substitute for hard work over a long period of time. I learned that. I'd say I played drums very seriously for about a decade. And so as a result of that, I knew a lot of really talented musicians, really good musicians, things like that. And the best musicians I knew were the ones that just played and practiced all the time. So I mean, there's no substitute for practice, for working hard. And you're not going to be good at something the first time you try it in all likelihood. You can get better at anything with effort. So be kind to yourself and be patient, and you'll get better.
Yes, I completely agree. Well, thank you so much, Eric, for this conversation. Tune in next week for another exciting podcast episode. Thank you.
Thanks. It was great to meet you and great to talk.